interesting and exciting to see Representative Cori Bush and Bonnie Watson Coleman introduce this bill that would, here, I'll move this out of the way so you can see the full title, decriminalize possession of all drugs on the federal level. And unfortunately, nothing's probably going to happen with it. Perhaps it could pass the House. I doubt you could probably, unfortunately, get enough Democratic support to go with this, and then very slim majority they have in the Senate. Kamala Harris probably wouldn't, sign it. She's flip-flopped on legalizing marijuana. Joe Biden was a huge proponent of the war on drugs, still doesn't think fucking marijuana needs to be legalized. So basically dead in the water, but it is good to see that we're progressing to a certain point that at least this legislation gets introduced. Now, unfortunately, it should be the legalization of all drugs, because that would be the best way to reduce the most amount of harm that the war on drugs has caused. Because if you're still only decriminalizing drugs, people still, in order to get them, will have to access them from the black market, leading to, things like overdose deaths from tainted drug supplies. So legalizing is definitely the way to go, but decriminalization is obviously a step in the right direction. Pair House Dems introduced legislation on Tuesday that would decriminalize possession of all drugs at the federal level for personal use and begin the process of prioritizing a public health approach to drug use over punishment and policing. So this is something that Portugal instituted, I was like back in 2000, early 2000s, something like that. They decriminalized all drug use in that country, and their overdose deaths plummeted as a result. And yeah, so they, again, treat it as a public health perspective instead of a, let's throw you in a fucking cage because you're an adult and you put this substance in your body. I mean, and again, if conservatives were actually consistent in their beliefs, not wanting government overreach, wanting people to actually have personal liberty and autonomy with their bodies, they would be all over this fucking shit. And then obviously Democrats should support it from the human rights perspective, but most don't, unfortunately, because they're spineless pieces of shit that say and do anything to get elected and to stay in power. Anyways, these are the necessary first steps advocates say for ending the war on drugs 50 years ago, first declared by Nixon. And again, war on drugs, hugely racist, hugely classist. The most vulnerable and marginalized are impacted by it the most. While rich people, particularly rich white people, are able to get away with using whatever substance they want because they're rich and white. Representative Bush, Watson Coleman introduced the Drug Policy Reform Act, which would eliminate federal criminal penalties for possession of any drug for personal use, including marijuana, cocaine, opioids, various psychedelics, and other drugs banned under the Controlled Substance Act. The bill aims to begin repairing some of the damage to communities and the lives of individuals caused by the drug war, which has contributed heavily to mass incarceration and other forms of state violence that have fallen hardest on low-income communities and peoples of color, as I mentioned. The economic stability of our carceral state depends on this misguided and racist policy, and we're here to say no more. It's time that we end this destruction, Watson told reporters on Tuesday, adding that as a nurse in St. Louis, or Bush, I should say, as a nurse in St. Louis, she saw how criminalization and stigma harms people who use drugs. Imagine what we could do if we built systems of care that treated and supported people. That is the world we should build. She's completely correct, obviously, but again, fortunately, this is probably dead in the water. Nothing's going to happen to it. And, Joe Biden isn't going to be using the bully pulpit to, implore people in Congress or Senate to support this, because he's, again, a huge proponent of this. Doesn't even think fucking marijuana should be legalized because more research needs to be done. But yeah, the right, or the far right, because again, the Democratic Party, especially Biden himself, is a right-wing politician. The far right considers, Biden to be this far left socialist. But I mean, Jesus fucking facepalm. Fuck. The bill would shift regulatory authority over the Controlled Substance Act from the DEA to the Department of Health and Human Services, signaling a seismic shift in terms of future policy that could reframe drug use as a health issue rather than a criminal offense, at least for the federal government. Again, the ultimate step needs to be the legalization of all drugs, because if you're a consenting adult, you should be able to put into your body whatever mind-altering substance that you want, whether it be cocaine, psychedelics, marijuana, opioids, alcohol, nicotine, whatever it may be. You're a consenting adult. Obviously, don't get high on any of those things and go out and drive. Don't go out and harm people, but consenting adult, you should have the discretion to put in your body whatever you want. I mean, we're the land of the free, right? Obviously, that's a fucking crock of shit. We have the was it around 5% of the world's population, but 22% to 25% of the world's prison population. Land of the free, am I right? I mean, Jesus Christ. I don't remember who said it, but I always come back to this quote. They call it the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. I mean, it's fucking on point. Yeah, the fucking scheduling of drugs. Like, what is it? Marijuana is on this. Yeah. Marijuana is listed on Schedule 1 alongside peyote, MDMA, and several other drugs. Schedule 1 drugs remain federally illegal for any purpose despite changes in state law. And then, yeah, here you go with the conservatives all about states' rights. But then they support the fucking draconian war on laws where this federal drug laws supersede state laws. So you see how much fucking hypocrisy is in our political system. But again, like, yeah, none of this shit should be fucking scheduled. MDMA, peyote, marijuana, that should all be fucking legalized, obviously. I mean, for fuck's sake, peyote is a lot fucking safer than alcohol or cigarettes, which are completely illegal. You can get cigarettes at 18, alcohol at fucking 21. How many tens, hundreds of thousands of people do both of those substances kill each year? And the reason why those are legalized is because the state and these huge corporations have found ways to profit off it. A little bit harder to do that with peyote, right? Comes from a cactus, I believe. Currently, changing federal drug scheduling requires an act of Congress or action by the DEA. Federal Drug War Agency has refused to reschedule marijuana because it brings a lot of money into their fucking coffers going after people for weed. Based on science and public health concerns rather than regulating drugs. I mean, it's obviously not being done in the fucking interest of public health. Poll shows 80% of Democrats, Republicans, and Independents agree the drug war policy is a failure. What did the fucking other 20% thinking? Do they work for the DEA or something? Or they work in the prison industrial complex some capacity? 2/3 of voters say criminal penalties should be removed for all drugs, not just marijuana, so the money spent on drug enforcement can be reinvested into addiction treatment, mental health services. Other polls show that public opinion about drugs and prohibition continues to shift, but the bill faces steep uphill climb in Congress, as I alluded to earlier. And again, more than likely, if a person has a drug addiction, there's a good chance it stems from childhood trauma. So, I mean, just think about how inhumane and disgusting that is. Somebody who is dealing with childhood trauma, they're medicating, through these various substances, and then they get locked in a fucking cage, treated just so horribly and inhumanely by the state. I mean, it's obviously not going to fucking help anything. But again, that's not what prisons are really designed to do, right? Last year, House Dems passed the legislation that would remove marijuana from Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substance Act, effectively decriminalizing cannabis at the federal level. However, the legislation went nowhere in the Senate, even though, Republicans should, in theory, if they're actually stayed true to their values, would support that. However, legislation went nowhere. Democrats now hold the slimmest majority in the Senate, but the Biden admin has signaled that marijuana reform is far from a priority, if not off the table entirely. I alluded to this earlier. He's wary of marijuana legislation. Reports suggest Vice President Harris, the tie-breaking vote for the Dems in the Senate, may have flip-flopped after campaigning on the issue. Again, most of these fucking piece of shit corporate neoliberal, neoconservative politicians willing to say or do anything to get elected and then completely flip-flop once in office. If Dem leadership has little appetite for marijuana reform, which is overwhelmingly supported by voters, then decriminalizing all drugs is a legislative long shot. Alright, it goes on, but you kind of get the gist of it. Definitely really interesting and important and needed legislation that Cori Bush and Bonnie Watson Coleman introduced in the House, but as the article and I alluded to, probably going nowhere because, let's face it, most politicians aren't really in favor of this for various reasons, and that's a shame because the war on drugs causes so much harm, and again, it impacts the most vulnerable and marginalized among us. Like the video if you like the damn video. Subscribe for more content. Peace. Much love.